So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to pre-think assumptions. My name is Rajat Chadana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. Supporting me in this session, we have Harsha, who's a principal GMAT expert at e-GMAT, and he's going to be supporting us today, as well as Sandeep, who's a principal GMAT strategy expert at e-GMAT, and he is also going to support us today. In this webinar, we're going to learn how to pre-think assumptions. We're going to start with the very foundation of pre-thinking, or actually very foundation of assumptions, then learn pre-thinking, and then apply pre-thinking to first simple arguments and then very challenging questions. It's a fairly application-focused webinar, and to make sure that you're ready to make the most out of it, we did send a few video lessons your way. They were on the foundations of assumptions. If you look at the top left-hand corner, you'd be able to see Introduction to Assumptions. That's the first one. The second one was pre-thinking in arguments that focus on logical gap type structures. And the third one was pre-thinking, where you compare two entities. If you've gone through these video lessons, that's wonderful. If you've had high scores on these video lessons, each of these lessons has an AI-built evaluation engine, then that's excellent. If you haven't gone through them, post this this webinar, I'd recommend that you go through these video lessons. It'll reinforce the learnings that you'll have from this webinar, and it'll help improve that score even further. It'll also, of course, be solving about 20 odd arguments through these lessons. With that, we have some upcoming free webinars. We have a free GMAT algebra webinar that's tomorrow, 24 hours from now. In this webinar, we talk about two topics: inequalities and absolute values. We start again from the very foundation and then go on to solving difficult data sufficiency questions in these topics. Again, inequalities, absolute value, really important topics in the context of the algebra portion of the quant section. If you want to learn about them, definitely attend that. And then for those of you who need help building their personalized study plan, who need help figuring out, hey, how do you get to that 730, 740, 760 scores? What metrics should I track? How do I know, even without taking a mock test, that I can get there? We have a strategy webinar next weekend, exactly a week from now, and which will talk about all of that. All right, let me hide this. Well, let's kind of get to know you guys a bit better. I have about 138 students here in the webinar. I want to know a few things about you. We have a question which is already there, which is, when do you guys plan to take the test? If you have not responded to that one, please do so. The second one is, what's your target GMAT score? So with regards to when do people plan to take the test, I see about 61% of you are or 61% have more than 46 days before you take the test, and then another around about 40% of you are in that 15 to 45 day bracket. In fact, we have about 21 of you are in that next 15-day bracket. And with regards to the target scores, about half of you are in that 730 to 750 bracket, very significant number, and also in the 760 or higher bracket. And then we have about 30% of you who are in that 720 or lower, and out of that, very significant number in that 710, 720 bracket. Okay, let's kind of add one other data point, and which is, what kind of where do you plan to take the test? Do you plan to take the online GMAT, which is now called the enhanced online GMAT, or do you guys plan to take the in-center test? Let me hide these because we've already discussed these. Okay. All right, about 60% if you plan to take it in center, and another 32% plan to take the test online. And then, a few of you are ambivalent. You don't really care. You do it whichever seems better. Okay, sounds wonderful. Let me hide this. With that, I'm going to go into the webinar pane. As we go there, the screen will have changed for you. And if you see CR1 pre-thinking for assumptions, that change has settled down. You are you basically are seeing what you should be seeing. So if you see CR1 pre-thinking for assumptions, you can select yes, so I know it is. The system has settled down at your end. All right, that's wonderful. Pretty much everyone can see that. So just a lay of the land. This is what we call as the main session view. And in this view, I'll have a presentation which you see on the top left-hand corner that occupies, I think, a majority of the screen. Below the presentation, you actually have what we call as a Q&A or a question and answer pod. This is the place for your questions. While I'm presenting, if you have any doubts, please put that question over there. That's why Harsha and Sandeep are there. If you have a subject matter doubt, Harsha can respond to it. If you have a GMAT strategy related doubt, then Sandeep can respond to it. So that way we'll go through the session. The session is about 2 hours and 20 minutes from this time on, give or take 10 minutes here or there, and you still get your doubts answered. On the right hand side, which is on the right vertical entire pane, is a place for my questions and your responses. So we usually have two kinds of poll questions here. One is about a multiple choice question. The generic yes no question is a multiple choice type where you have to choose one or many options. That'd be there. And then we have a generic input we call as a generic short answer question where you can put in your qualitative inputs or so. Okay. Now just multiple choice question, top poll. How many of you are e-GMAT students? If you're an e-GMAT student, if you're a paid student, then select yes. If you're not a paid student, then select no. All right, about 34%, 35% of you are e-GMAT students, about 56% of you are not e-GMAT students, about 170 students right now here in the webinar. That's wonderful. Okay. Dr. Winnie saying, I'm taking the GMAT next week, and should I focus on revising theory or solving questions? Revising your mistakes, Dr. Winnie. That's what I would say. And yeah, just don't learn anything new is what my recommendation would be. And those are exactly the kind of questions that Sandeep could answer. All right, so since about 60% of you are not e-GMAT students, I'm going to just talk a bit about, spend about 5 minutes talking about e-GMAT, and then we're going to go right into the session. So again, about 6 minutes, we'll talk about this, and then we'll go right into the core of this webinar. Now, if you're an e-GMAT student, one thing that you know is the way we approach learning is very different from the way other prep companies approach learning. Why? Because we follow a very different architecture of learning. In fact, if you think about two learning architectures that exist today, one is what we call as the book-based architecture, which is essentially where you learn, and then you go practice questions. And then the feedback that you get is either when you're practicing questions or when you're taking mock tests. This is what most prep courses focus on. They have what we call as the book-based learning architecture. At e-GMAT, we believe in a very different learning architecture, which is what we call as a private tutoring-based learning architecture. And where, as you're learning, you get integrated feedback. If you actually improve as you're learning, if you are not learning properly, you get feedback to make course correction right then and there. That's the architecture that we have invested in over the last decade. That's the architecture around which we built a lot of our content and pretty much all of our technology. And we believe that's a much superior architecture and has delivered really good results for us. And just to really tell you the kind of results that it has delivered, what this chart shows is the number of 700 plus scores that were reported on GMAT Club in the year 2021. Again, this data is only till August 15, and it compares data for 2 years, 2020 till August 15 and 2021. And we invested a ton in 2020 and 2021 in both content and technology, and you can really see how the number of 700 plus scores that reported by our students went up. Went up about 3x. Went up about 3x. Wrong chart. And whereas for most of the other companies, that number remained almost the same. For Manhattan Prep, that number remained the same. For Target Test Prep, that number remained the same. And for GMAT, they saw an increase as well. But in 2020, they were only a partner for 6 months. So if you factor those numbers, and you find that numbers almost constant. And not just 700 plus scores, we actually led in multiple categories. Most 730 plus scores, most retake stories, and most 100-point score improvements as well. In fact, if you compare us to all the other partners for the year 2021, we accounted for 55% of all 700 plus scores reported on GMAT Club. The other 10 partners together accounted for the remaining 45%. Okay, with that, let's go right into the crux of this session. Let's just hold on. Yep, that's great. Also, if you want to stay updated with all things e-GMAT, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. This is, by the way, how I look for those of you who did not watch the pre-session video. Again, if you search for me on LinkedIn, you'd be able to get to my LinkedIn account. We have upwards of 19,000 students at top business schools who are connected with me on LinkedIn. If you're connected to anyone at a top business school, most likely I'll be your second connect. Okay. So essentially, with that, we're done with this part of the webinar. We're going to go right into the core of it. And let's talk about the agenda over here. So we're first going to understand how you approach CR questions today. And primarily, we're going to focus on assumption questions, although pre-thinking applies to strengthen, weaken, evaluate, logically complete, and in fact, even bold-faced questions. Our focus today would be to make sure you learn pre-thinking for assumptions so that you have that foundation, and then you can extend that to all of these other question types. So we're going to understand how you do this today, and then we're going to teach you pre-thinking, and we'll do this through about 3 arguments. Now, in these 3 arguments, one's a very simple argument, second is a pure argument with no answer choices, and the third one is, I call it simple, but it's a 700 level official question. The idea of each of these is to make sure that that you understand what pre-thinking is. Once you do this, you'll have a fairly good idea of how pre-thinking works, the foundation of what an assumption is, how to read an argument, and so on and so forth. And then from this point on, we're going to apply pre-thinking to 2 of the most challenging official questions that I know of. Again, these are going to be assumption questions. You're going to solve these questions like a quiz. Now, my objective here is not going to be to really say ensure that you get them right. Why? Because these are difficult questions. But my objective with these questions is to kind of give you the next set of knowledge base to really say, hey, what are all the attributes that you need to excel in GMAT critical reasoning. And so each of these 5 questions will play a role in itself in helping you get there. And then my expectation is that post this, you're going to practice what you've learned through the pre-session video lessons that were there and the practice questions that we provide to everyone on our platform. And as you apply that, you'd be able to see that significant improvement. So we'll also tell you, okay, where should you practice more from? Okay. With that, at very high level, we'll start with how you approach critical reasoning today, and then we'll help you excel there. So let's talk about your current approach to critical reasoning. And so I'm going to put a question over here. It says, which methodology do you follow? I'm going to talk about 2 methodologies here. But before we do that, I want to discuss what pre-thinking is. Now, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because pre-thinking, even though this term has existed in the world of GMAT prep or LSAT prep for a very long time, it's been abused, it's been misinterpreted. So pre-thinking, the precise definition of pre-thinking is thinking of one assumption, one potential assumption in your mind. And a skilled pre-thinker is able to do this in about 15 seconds. And you've got to do it before you look at answer choices. Now, I want to talk about each aspect of this. So an argument can have multiple assumptions. Through examples in this webinar, we're going to see those assumptions. We only want to worry about one potential assumption. Why? Because the objective of pre-thinking is that you should understand the logic that the author uses to arrive at the argument. You should be able to poke holes in that logic. And so even though an argument can have, as many as 4 assumptions, as long as you can get to one, you'd be able to get to the other ones. And even though, let's say you get to assumption number 1 and in the answer choices, you have assumption number 3, the very fact that you can get to assumption number 1, which means you understand the logic, you should be able to mark 3 as correct when you see it in the answer choices. So that's where I want to make sure that this is. A skilled pre-thinker is able to do this in 15 seconds or less after he or she reads the argument. Early on, you're going to take a lot longer, and that's absolutely okay. And this has to be done before the information that is provided in the answer choices pollute your mind. One thing I also want to emphasize is pre-thinking is not the same as predicting the answer. We are not trying to predict the answer. We are just looking to ensure that you understand the logic that the author uses. And I want to make sure that we do this. Why? Because prior to this, other prep companies use the word pre-thinking. They just equated it to prediction. We are not trying to predict the answer. We're not trying to do black magic here. We are merely trying to ensure that you understand the logic that the author uses to arrive at the conclusion. That's it. Okay, So there are two methods that people usually follow. One is they read the argument, then they start looking at answer choices, and they do a back and forth till they reach a candidate that they like. The second is they read the argument, they focus on pre-thinking, and then they evaluate the answer choices. And in this case, they come back to the argument only as needed. So I want to understand which methodology do you follow out of these two? Do you do that back and forth, or do you focus on spending more time on the argument and then you come back to the argument only as needed? I have about 172 students here. I only have about 70 responses. Let's get to at least 120 responses before I broadcast the results. Okay, 90, 95, 98, 99, 100. Let's get to 120 here, 110. 119, and let's get one more, and then I'm going to broadcast results. So this is how you guys scored. About 58% of you follow methodology one, where you do the back and forth. About 40% of you, or 41% of you, and the numbers changing, follow methodology two. I want each one of you to try this methodology out, give it its fair shot, so that you can see how you get to that score. Now, pre-thinking isn't a silver bullet. It's not going to just improve your ability. Pre-thinking needs to be combined with certain core skills that, once you have those skills, you'd find that your ability in CR would go up tremendously, and you learn more with every CR question that you solve. Okay. One of the biggest and the most important skills on the GMAT, that's tested on the GMAT, not just on critical reasoning, in reading comprehension as well, is the ability to visualize. A lot of people think that if you want to e-GMAT verbal, you need to be a voracious reader. A lot of people think you need to be reading novels. People who actually e-GMAT verbal need not necessarily be voracious readers, but they need to be able to visualize the information that they read. The beauty of this is you're not looking to be able to read fast. Why? Because the GMAT's not a test of speed, I can tell you that, and we'll discuss this more in the strategy session. I'm going to prove that to you, but it's the ability to read and comprehend what you're reading is what's tested, and visualization helps you actually do that. So just as an example, I'm going to just talk about it. If the author, for example, in an argument makes a prediction that the seawall will be able to sustain the high waves from the tsunami, then, and if you want to just break that conclusion, think about a scenario in which the seawall will not be able to sustain. Maybe the seawall certified only to sustain impact from water, and maybe the tsunami is going to drive some ships through it. That ability to visualize things. And again, this may seem very difficult right now, and it is, but it's an ability that you can build on, and that's something that we're going to emphasize on building throughout this argument. We're going to really focus on building those skills. Okay. The second thing is reading the argument properly, which means that understanding the conclusion, yes, but also understanding the reasoning behind that conclusion. CR arguments are very, very, very logical, and so you don't want to rush through reading that argument. You want to understand that logic. And once you understand that logic, you'd find that, hey, the author is a very logical person. The conclusion seems to make sense. And so precisely pointing to that logic, that precision is really important. And then once you do all of this, that's when we'll talk about this thing called the falsification question, which is what helps you do that pre-thinking. Okay. So with that, I want to ask you guys what an assumption is. And to do that, I'm going to give you a very simple argument. Why? Because each one of us is we do really well when finding assumptions. We are an implicit critical reasoner is what I would say. Many of us are explicit critical reasoners as well, but pretty much everyone's an implicit critical reasoner. And to prove that, I'm going to give you a very simple argument about a context that you guys think day in and day out about, and most of you should be able to come up with an assumption for this one. So here's a very simple argument, which is something that you think about day in and day out, and I want you to tell me, what does the author assume here? So type that answer in the short answer pod, and type it, press enter. When you press enter, I'll get it. And when I get about 30 responses, I'm going to broadcast results, and you'll be able to see it. So even though you may not be seeing it on your screen now because I've not shared those results, your responses are there. I have about 7 responses now, about 10 responses. 15 responses. It's 18, 22, 24, 26, 28, 31. Good. Let me broadcast results. Just guys, the Q&A part, the question and answer part that you see, which is below the presentation, it's for your questions to us, not your responses to my questions. The part on the right hand side is for your responses to my questions. Okay. And as you can see, most of you have gotten to the correct response, which is that Ivy Leagues need that. Some of you, and that's about 70 to 80% of you, GMAT score required by Ivy League is higher than 500. All of this all of these are good responses. A few of you have said, where you've qualified this as not an excellent score or a poor score. You guys are kind of not talking about the core piece here. You're bringing your innate knowledge in this case, but majority of you have essentially gotten to the correct assumption. Why? Because this is a context that you guys think about. You didn't need a lot of time to visualize this argument. So what's going on over here? In the first statement, the author gives you a data point, which is that score of 500 on the GMAT, and then the author makes a claim based on that data point where he says, hey, here's a data point that Joe has, which is he has the score of 500. And then he says, based on this score, I can say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League college. So he makes a logical jump. And while making that logical jump, he assumes that, hey, a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe, and this part is really important. Why? Because the conclusion is not about the Prince of Saudi Arabia. The conclusion is about Joe. So the assumption has to be for an entity like Joe. And so score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges, or Ivy League colleges require that someone like Joe scores over 500. Again, you guys got it. Again, once you understand the argument, coming up with assumptions becomes a fairly implicit exercise or so. And so the explicit piece that we're going to do is to make sure that we comprehend the arguments well, and then we ask that falsification question. Okay, so with that, I want you to tell me what is an assumption. And this time I'm going to continue broadcast results so that you guys can see what others can type. But what is the definition of an assumption? What is the definition of an assumption? Right. If you don't have a bottle of water with you, I would recommend that you keep one. That way you'll have continuity during the session as we kind of pace things up in the later part of the session. All right, I have a good 39, 40 responses. Assumption is something which is implied, okay, an implied notion that must be true for the conclusion to hold true, the idea that the author surely thought. It's ability to idea notion that might not necessarily be true, okay. Okay, so an assumption is an unstated idea, and some of you have gotten this right, that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So I'm going to just talk about two aspects of this. And I'm not going to ask you to write down a bunch of things, and I'm going to give you this presentation, but I'm going to write down 3 odd things. I'm going to ask you to write down 3 odd things during this webinar. And this is one of these 3 things. Why? Because this is a definition that you need to A, know by heart, and B, understand completely. Because if you know this, then you can pretty much answer 80 to 90% of assumption questions there. When you're confused, if you recall this definition and recall the understanding of this definition, you should be able to evaluate whether an answer choice is correct or not. So I want to talk about 2 aspects which are very prevalent in this in this definition. Again, you have this definition over here once again. So the first thing is it's an unstated idea, which means an assumption must provide information that's not inferable from the argument. Okay. The second thing is this must be true, which is a really important aspect of an assumption, which means that the information provided by argument, it must be essential for the conclusion to stay true. Or in other words, without the assumption, there is a possibility that your conclusion can be broken down. So it's that essential piece of information. Because it's unstated, the author hasn't explicitly stated that in the argument. Okay, really important piece over here. Okay, just make sure. Yes. Okay. Now, I want you to visualize the aspect of assumption. Let's kind of assume that, we convert an argument into a house over here, and where the conclusion is the roof, and you have these three supporting statements that are pillars that are supporting the roof. Now, again, remember, an assumption is an unstated idea, but let's assume that we remove the unstated constraint, because I want to emphasize on the must be true aspect of the assumption here. So you have three pillars and which are supporting your conclusion, which is your roof. Now, to figure out which one of them satisfies that must be true condition, let's kind of do an experiment. Let's call these pillars 1, 2, and 3. So if I remove 1 and the roof still stays upright, then what it means is that 1 is not a must be true pillar. It made the roof stronger, but it's not a must be true pillar, or in other words, number 1 is not an assumption. This is, again, very similar to you evaluating an answer choice. That pillar is evaluating an answer choice or so. Okay. Let's say we remove pillar number 2 and the roof still stays upright. Okay. Or pillar number 3, I'm sorry. Then number 3 is also not an assumption. Okay. Then let's bring all of these back. And if we remove pillar number 2, and despite pillars number 1 and 3 being there, the roof caves in, then that's what an assumption is. It's that essential pillar that is required for the conclusion to hold true. And that's that must be true notion that I want to make sure that you understand. Okay. And the reason why this is really important is because as you will solve questions, you'll evaluate answer choices, and some of the answer choices will confuse you. And the question that you'll ask is, what will happen to the conclusion if the statement that I'm evaluating is not true? Well, if that conclusion falls apart, if that conclusion breaks down, then you know that's the correct assumption. If the conclusion doesn't break down, if the roof stays upright, then you know it's the incorrect assumption. Just a generic yes no question. Visually, we're going to prove this through multiple examples, but just logically, does that make sense? The translation of this definition to this roof example. Do you have a slightly better understanding of what that must be true aspect is? Good. Okay. So we talked about this. So if we were to translate this into words, what this means is that if the assumption is not true, or if the information provided by the assumption is not true, then the conclusion can no longer hold true. Okay. Or in other words, the information in the assumption is so critical to the conclusion that without it, the conclusion can be destroyed. And that's the fundamental aspect of must be true. A simpler word means to say this is the assumption, again, must be true for the conclusion to remain true or valid. Okay. So now we want to talk about what does it mean to destroy this conclusion? Okay. Or what does falsification or destruction of conclusion mean? We're going to still take that same example that was there. Okay. So in what scenario can the conclusion be destroyed? If, despite getting that score of 500, Joe gets admission into an Ivy League college. Everyone's clear with that? If this happens, then the conclusion is destroyed, right? Right? Okay, everyone gets that. That's very simple. Again, a context that we are very intimately familiar with. So let's kind of understand, how do we evaluate whether an answer choice is correct? Okay. So this is what we said is the correct answer choice. And so our goal is to evaluate, does it provide must be true information? I mean, we know it's the correct answer, but let's kind of go through that formal process. Why? Because sometimes your assumptions won't be as slam dunk, and you'll be left with multiple options, and the same process will help you evaluate that. So we're going to evaluate this option, say, is this a must be true condition, which is a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. So then we ask ourselves, what happens if we remove this pillar, if this information is not true? So when you say an information is not true, by definition, or it's not must be true, in other words, what you're really saying is that its negated instance becomes true. Okay. So if you say this is not must be true in the context of my argument, then what you're saying is that a score of 500 for someone like Joe becomes acceptable to Ivy League schools. Now, what happens to my conclusion if this instance, if this becomes a possibility? Is my conclusion destroyed? Absolutely. Why? Because if I can say that a score of 500 on the GMAT is acceptable to Ivy League schools, then I cannot say with 100% certainty as an author that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. Why? Because the negated instances becomes true now. So some of you may be saying, how can you say if a statement isn't true, then its negated instance becomes true? Let's take a few more examples. Okay. When you really say Harvard has the best MBA college, and if you say that's not must be true, what you are essentially saying is that Harvard does not have the best MBA college, or an MBA program which is better than Harvard or just as good as Harvard exists. Right? When you say this is not must be true, you're also saying this implicitly. Okay. Similarly, if you say John runs faster than David, if you say that's not true, then what you're also saying is that David can be just as fast as John, or David can also be faster than John. So it's really important to understand when you say a statement is not an assumption, which means it's not a must be true. By definition, what you're really saying is its negated version, the possibility of that being possible in the context of that of my argument is there. And if with that negated statement, if your conclusion breaks down, then the statement that you negated was your assumption. Okay. So this is the must be true aspect of the assumption, and it comes truly from the very definition of an assumption. Why? Because it's an unstated idea that is required or must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Okay. Now it also cuts the other way. If you're talking about an incorrect answer choice, let's go back, sorry about that. If you're talking about an incorrect answer choice, then the conclusion will not break down in the presence of its negated instance. That's kind of the very definition of it. Okay, so let's look at that with an example as well. A score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. We want to really understand, hey, is that a must be true statement? And to do that, let's follow the same process. So we ask ourselves, is this must be true? So we figure out what's its negated instance. If you say this is not must be true, then what you're saying is that this possibility exists, that a score of 500 on the GMAT now is considered a good score. Okay, so what happens if a score of 500 is considered a good score? You ask the same question. Will Joe get admission if the score of 500 on the GMAT is considered good? The answer is no, not really. Why? Because when I look at my argument, it's not based on what you call that score of 500. The author is simply saying Joe scored 500 on the GMAT, therefore he will not get admission in an Ivy League college. It's based on that very number, not what that number is qualified as. In other words, you could replace us by 720 and that answer would still remain the same. Okay, and that's the must be true aspect of it. Okay. Similarly, you can use this to again reject an answer choice such as this, which is the quality of an applicant's essays does not play a significant role in deciding whether he gets into an Ivy League college. Let's say, is this must be true? Is this an assumption? Okay, so if we had to evaluate this, we say, what happens if we remove this information or the information provided by this statement? So let's kind of look at this over here, and the negated instances, the quality of an applicant's essays does not play a significant role, or the essays are not important essentially. So does Joe get admission when essays start, they do play a significant role? I said the other way around. Either way, the answer remains the same. So does Joe get admission when the essays start playing a significant role? No, really not. Why? Because if Joe doesn't meet that minimum threshold that is required, if Joe still has 500 and that 500 doesn't meet that minimum threshold, then regardless of the quality of essays, he will not get admission in an Ivy League college. So the quality of someone's essays really does not matter. Okay, remember, this doesn't say that essays can overcome a low GMAT score. Okay, what it says is that whether it plays a significant role or not. And this is why understanding the logic of the argument is really important, and understanding that must be true is really important. Again, with that, we've gone through what we call as a foundation of what an assumption was, what must be true was. Just to summarize, for the correct answer choice, the conclusion will break down in the presence of a negated version. Or in other words, if you remove that pillar from the roof will cave in. That's the negated version of that answer choice. For the incorrect answer choice, you remove that pillar, the conclusion will continue to stay strong. Okay. And you're going to see more and more of this. Okay, so this was a very background of what an assumption is. And it's really important. Why? Because as we solve difficult questions, the fundamental skill of understanding of what an assumption is, what must be true, is going to be really important. Pre-thinking is going to help make that understanding easier, but you still need that fundamental understanding. So are you guys ready? Just if you can type yes, no, why, and for just to learn pre-thinking. One, good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an argument. It's going to be a more sophisticated argument than the one that I gave you earlier. And in the short answer pod, I want you to tell me what does the author assume here. So just an argument, no answer choices. So you're going to try and do pre-thinking without a framework, and then we're going to do pre-thinking with a framework. Okay. Again, simple argument over here. So the process that we're going to follow is I'm going to give you the argument, just the argument, no answer choices. I want you to type in what you pre-think, and then this is 2 minutes. I'm going to give you 2.5 up to 3 minutes or so. And so you'll have ample time. So don't worry about timing, go slow and put in those answers in the short answer pod. And then we're going to look at how I do pre-thinking, and then we're going to evaluate some submissions. Okay. So with that, make sure you have a pen and paper ready and a bottle of water if you need that. And here is your first argument. I'm going to remove broadcast results, but as you type your answer and press enter, I will still get those answers. So don't worry about those. Your answers aren't going anywhere. Okay, 3, 2, and 1. And here is your argument. Good luck, guys. I'm going to mute myself for about 2.5 to 3 minutes. All right, guys, last 15 seconds, get those answers in. Okay, 3, 2, and 1. That is excellent. Okay, guys, Gaurav and Yashasri, please don't put your answers in the Q&A pod. It clouds other people's questions. It doesn't allow us to get to it. Please put the answers in the short answer pod, which is on the right-hand side. That's the place where you respond to my questions. The Q&A pod, which is below the presentation, is where we respond to your questions. Okay, as long as we follow that, that'll be excellent. All right, let me broadcast results. So we got what, a good around 40 odd answers, considering the answers that we got in the Q&A pod, and you can really see the variety of answers. Some people talk about the timing piece, whether professors spend more time on teaching or less time on teaching. Others talked about the behavior of the reward system changing the behavior. Some talked about the amount of the dollar amount of rewards, and others talked about whether professors are more interested in self-development, and is that why they do research, and so on and so forth. So you can really see, this one argument allowed many of you to think in a variety of directions. Some of those are correct, others are not, but essentially, without a proper framework to do pre-thinking, just from the same piece of information given to about 150 to 155 people, we get a variety of answers. Okay, and we want to make sure that we confine that variety. We want to make sure that the answers are more precise, more linked to the conclusion, and which is why we're going to do pre-thinking. Okay, so let's move forward with this. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to understand which statement is my conclusion, and we're going to visualize this. So the first thing we're going to really look at is defining or identifying the conclusion. All right, so I have a poll question over here, and the question asks which statement is the conclusion. I'm going to show the entire passage, but before that, hold on. I want to talk about the pre-thinking method before I talk about this. So how do we go about pre-thinking? The fundamental principle of this falsification method, it starts from the very definition of an assumption. What is an assumption? It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Okay, or in other words, without an assumption, there's a possibility that the conclusion can break down. So if you think about that roof visualization, right, where you're talking about the essential pillar, without that essential pillar, the roof will cave in. So if you were thinking about designing a house and you were to really say, okay, where do I put pillars? How would you go about doing that? You would figure out, okay, in my architecture, where does the roof cave in? And then you would put a pillar over there. Okay, or in other words, an assumption is built around scenarios where the conclusion breaks. Why? Because all an assumption really says is, in the context of this argument, those scenarios are not possible. So if we were to find out where to put these essential pillars, or if we were to find out what the assumptions are, we have to ask ourselves, hey, in which scenario, given all the information in the passage, does my conclusion break down? If we can find those scenarios, then my assumption really is that such scenarios are not possible in the context of this argument. Does that make sense? Let me just put in a yes no poll question over here and remove the prior answer. Does that make sense? Yeah, let's just figure out where the roof caves in. We're going to just put the assumptions over there because we don't want the roof to cave in. That's all that we are trying to do. Good, 93% of you get it. Those who don't, you can put a question in the Q&A pod. But the pre-thinking approach is formulating that falsification question on this template. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? This is the second thing that I want you to write down. I said I'm going to ask you to write down 3 things. One was the definition of an assumption. This is the second thing. Write down this falsification question. We're going to solve 4 questions, and each one of these 4 examples, we're going to translate this into the context of that example. The same question. And the beauty of pre-thinking is, regardless of the argument structure, whether it's a causal argument or a predictive argument, whether it compares to entities, whether it's talking about segments, this question remains the same. And that's what I call as a sustainable and a scalable method. Okay, so let's kind of look at this over here. This is my argument. I've divided this argument into 3 different statements. I want you to tell me which one is the main conclusion, or what statement is the author trying to assert from this argument? Is it statement 1, 2, or 3? Again, don't choose statement 4. There is no statement 4 here. So it's either 1, 2, or 3. Which statement is the main conclusion in this argument? 3. Come on, I need a few more responses, guys. We have 150 students over here, and I just have about 64, 65 odd responses. You guys have solved this. It's a very simple thing. Which is the main conclusion here that I need to worry about keeping safe or not getting destroyed? 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. I have upwards of close to 100 answers. That's good. One of the beautiful things about this is, if you are on this webinar, you participate. It's what I call as a very low risk environment. No one's evaluating you. No one's judging you here. The reason why you are here is, excuse me, to improve. And by putting an answer, you get feedback as to what you thought, whether you were right or not. If you don't put an answer over there, you won't know if you're right or not. 43% of you say statement 2 is the correct answer, and this is truly correct. Statement 2 is indeed the main conclusion. The main conclusion is something that the author of the argument, which is the person who's written the argument, wants you to believe in, or wants you to actually, it's an agenda that he wants to further on, which he wants to really take forward. And when you look at this argument, statement 2 is what the author wants to assert or take forward from this, or prove from this argument. When he says clearly the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system. What he's saying is, hey, it's the reward system that is to blame. And that's what he wants to take forward. Statement 1, because about 30% of you have said statement 1 is the main conclusion. That is not what the author wants you to prove. In fact, that's a conclusion given by a research paper. The author uses statement 1 to arrive at the main conclusion. So it's something that sets context for the argument. And then let's look at statement number 3. Statement number 3 is again provided by the author. It's a data point that's provided by the author to make sure that you believe more in statement 2. It's a strengthener or a premise, as we call it, that the author provides so that your belief in statement 2 increases. Prashant says, so the main conclusion could be in between the statements. Absolutely, yes. Again, the fundamental piece. So in 90% of the arguments, the main conclusion is towards the end, but main conclusion is what the author wants you to believe. And if you go to boldface questions, anyone over here has solved boldface questions? Let me put in a yes, no. Poll over here. How many of you have solved boldface questions here? Yes, no. But half of you have solved boldface questions or structure of argument questions. So in most assumption, strength, and weaken questions, you'll see the main conclusion towards the end. But in boldface questions, where you also have arguments, but half of them will have the main conclusion in the center. So again, this is a skill you need to build. Sukruti says, how is statement 3 supporting statement 2? Okay, that's a great question. This is what I call as the disappearance test. Now, Sukruti, let's kind of look at statement number 2, and I want you to tell me what happens if I remove the information, and let's just see rectangle. I want to make sure I fill this. If I remove this information from, if I remove statement 3 from the argument, okay, let's just fill this with something. If I remove statement 3 from the argument, if this information is gone, you only had statements 1 and 2. What happens to your belief in statement 2? Does it go up? Does it go down? If there is no statement 3, if you just are reading statements 1 and 2, what happens to your belief? It goes down, right? You don't believe as much in the conclusion as you did with this piece over here. So if removing a statement reduces your belief in the conclusion, then what is the statement doing? It's increasing your belief in the conclusion, or it's a premise or a strengthener. Does that make sense? Good question, Sukriti. If you were to really create an argument structure, those are the questions that you ask. Okay. So One of the other things as you go through on some of the foundation files is you're going to see conclusion markers, and clearly is a conclusion marker as well. Excuse me. So statement 2 is the main conclusion. It's what the author wants you to believe in. Now let's kind of visualize this conclusion, okay? And there are multiple ways to visualize it. There's no one right way to visualize it. There are multiple correct ways. As long as you visualize it, that's something which is there. So I want you to understand 2 or 3 things about the conclusion. And I'm going to go back over here. First is the author does not dispute the findings of these papers. So where the paper says that, tenured professors are those on their way to tenure. So the segment 1 of people who teach, they enhance student learning less than full-time lecturers do. So one way to visualize this piece is that, hey, maybe tenured professors only enhance student learning for 40% of the students, whereas full-time lecturers enhance student learning for 70% of the students, okay? Or another way to look at this is that the extent of learning improvement of a class of students is 40% by tenured professors when measured through some metric, and it's 70% by full-time lecturers. As long as you pick 2 numbers that are reasonably distinct, that's okay. And that visualization is really important here. And again, as long as you understand the author is not disputing the report's finding, which is in statement number 1, he's just blaming that reward system for it. Okay. So with that understanding, with that visualization, let's kind of build that logical structure. Now, let's talk about statement 3. And again, you have to understand each statement in the argument. So statement 3, whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Is it just tenured faculty, just full-time lecturers? Is it both of them, or is neither of them? Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? And remember, this is statement 3 over here. Just read this independently and tell me. 3. Again, remember I said participation, one of the biggest things. That's when you learn. I want to get about 90 responses here. 2 and I have 85 responses and 1. Let me end the poll. And you can see 75% of you say it's just tenured faculty, 24% of you say it's both. Majority of you are correct, it's just tenured faculty. Why? Because it says the criteria for rewarding tenured faculty typically places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching. This word greater over here, it's not to compare tenured faculty with full-time lecturers, it's to compare the emphasis on research and on teaching. So maybe there's a 70% emphasis on research and there's a 30% emphasis on teaching. That's kind of what it's saying. Again, visualize as you read. Now, how many of you understood this when you were doing the argument yourself, or when you were reading this by yourself? How many of you had this level of clarity when you were doing it by yourself? No. Again, that's a skill that you have to build. If you want to get to that 90th percentile, if you want to achieve that 730 or higher score, you got to build that. And that's why you got to read slowly. Okay. You have no idea how to do that? That's where you go through the master comprehension course. That's where you have to first do sentence correction before doing critical reasoning. You would learn this in comparisons in sentence correction. Okay, so just the argument structure over here. This is what the author wants to assert. This statement provides information that makes you believe in this main conclusion, and this is the context on which the main conclusion is built upon. Okay. So now we ask the pre-thinking question, which is under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? So we're going to translate this question into this argument. And this has 2 parts here. The first is the conclusion breakdown criteria, and the second is given the facts in the argument. And every question will have these 2 parts. So remember, first was the conclusion breakdown criteria. Second was my given the facts in the argument. So what does 1 translate to? Under what circumstances can we not blame the reward system? So this 1 translates to this. This is 1 over here. Okay. Under what circumstances can we not blame the reward system? Why? Because that's my conclusion breakdown criteria. Everyone good with one? You can see how this conclusion breakdown translates to this piece over here. Okay. Under what circumstances can we not blame the reward system? What are the facts in the argument? We know that full-time lecturers enhance student performance more than professors do, and we know that the reward system places greater emphasis on research than on teaching. So given these facts, under what circumstances can we not blame the reward system? Let's kind of come up with some of these circumstances. What are my breakdown scenarios? What if non-tenured faculty has an identical reward system? In that case, you can't blame the reward system, right? If you say both tenured and non-tenured, you have two entities you're comparing if they have an identical reward system. Can you see that? How this would break my conclusion down? I'm going to put in the yes no poll so that it becomes easier for you so that you don't have to type. I know some of you are using a cell phone. Okay. The next piece is, what if you put this reward system, what if no one behaves as per the reward system? And I'm going to remove broadcast results from here, but you can, in that case also, you can't blame the reward system. Why? Because the professors don't work as per the reward system. So you can't blame the reward system for the poor performance of professors. Okay. So what are my assumptions? Non-tenured professors do not have an identical reward system, or most tenured faculty care about the reward system. Okay, you translate this and say, if these are the scenarios in which my conclusion breaks down, then I can't allow those scenarios, which means these are my assumptions. There are a couple of other assumptions that are possible, but I wanted to show you the method first to really say, hey, can you really see that as you follow this process, you have a much better understanding of the argument. This process forces you to read and understand the argument, and B, you can really see through the assumptions. Can you see that piece over here? And this is something that I want you to take away from this. Now, this is not something that's going to come naturally to you or something that you're going to start doing tomorrow. No. But it is something that if you continue to do, you're going to find that you achieve much higher accuracy. Okay. So, how many of you are concerned about timing? You say, okay, man, this looks very different. Okay. Let me first say this, the GMAT's not a test of timing. Start with this. Okay, if you're saying you're always concerned with it, you should start worrying about timing when you're hitting that 650, 670 level in the mock, or when you're hitting that 70th percentile, not before that. Okay. A lot of people think I'm going to solve questions and I'm going to get better at doing this. The GMAT's a very different test than any test that you've seen. And just by solving questions, you can't get there. Why? Because you've got to build ability. On the other hand, if you solve fewer questions but spend more time on every question, you're going to find improvement is really, really important. Is really fast. So before I talk about the process, I want to just show you these results over here and this kind of improvement that you see this. Okay. So if these methods didn't work, then our students wouldn't be delivering these kind of results, or these kind of results or some. So here's how you're going to feel. This is a two-dimensional chart where on the y-axis you have the accuracy, and you see three groups over here: low, medium, and high accuracy. And on the x-axis you have time to answer questions. Now, in reality, this should also have a third dimension, which is difficulty level, but I didn't want to make the graph complicated. As I say, visualization should be simple. So let's say you're someone who's starting at point number 1 today. Let's say this is where you are, where accuracy is low and your time to answer questions is medium. The first thing that's going to happen as you start doing pre-thinking is that you're going to start reading slowly. You're learning a new method, so your accuracy will improve, but your time to answer questions will also go up. So as you can really see, you're going more on the right-hand side. The more right you go, the longer you take to answer questions. In fact, in the first 10 questions, you might end up taking 5-6 minutes per question or so. And that's okay. Okay. And at that point, some of you may really say, okay, why the hell am I doing pre-thinking? Because everyone keeps on telling me timing is the main piece on the GMAT. How many of you have heard this? Hey, If you can solve questions quickly, you can ace the GMAT. Okay, absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. As by the way, if you go to GMAT Club, look at GMAT Club's rating. The top 5 experts out of the 200 rated experts over there work at e-GMAT. Okay. The GMAT's not a test of timing, it's a test of a logical thought process. In fact, most people who do well on the GMAT read slowly but comprehend everything that they read. So there'll be people who would go from 1 to 2 and then they would drop out and they would not improve with pre-thinking. But as you continue to do pre-thinking, as you continue to focus on understanding everything that you read, what's going to happen is 10, 12, 15 arguments down the line, you're going to notice two things. One is your accuracy continues to improve. Why? Because as you're going through things slowly, your a lot of stuff would get clarified, and you're going to be much more comfortable reading through sentence structures, understanding what comparisons mean, visualizing that information. So suddenly you'll find that answers start to come a lot easier, and you're much more confident, and you're not looking to stop and visualize as much, and that be where you notice that, hey, my time to answer questions has reduced, my accuracy has continued to go up. Once you hit that point over here, you're going to really say, oh, now I understand why pre-thinking is such a powerful tool. Once you hit point number 3, you will have hit what we call in engineering as the point of hysteresis. There's no going back. There's going to be a huge resistance to go back from towards a non-pre-thinking approach. And as you continue to do this, your accuracy is going to continue to improve. Your time to answer questions is going to continue to move more and more in this direction or so. But it's really important for you to go through this journey before you come back here. Really important. Okay. And that's why it's hard. That's why 730 is 97 percentile. 760 is 99 percentile. It's that wherewithal that you need to have to get there, that you and if you don't have that wherewithal, if you really just give up on it, you're not going to find yourself improving to that 90th percentile in CR. How many questions? Rajesh has a question, does it take to go from 1 to 3 and then 4? So Rajesh, it depends on how diligent you are as you go from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. If you are very slow, if you're very deliberate, if you do a review of every mistake, and if you read through the answer choices very, very well, then 1 to 3 could be as few as 10 to 12 arguments. Again, you need really good solutions to be able to do this. So if you go and read the official guide solutions, you will not do that. Why? Because they don't describe how to translate each statement. They won't tell you, for example, the way we did in the previous question, what does statement 3 compare? They won't tell you that level of detail. You have to get to that level of detail to be able to go from 1 to 3. Because again, in the prior question, and you're going to see this in the next question, in every question, you'll have 5 to 7 learning pieces over there, and it's your job to extract those learning pieces. But if you don't have great solutions, you will not be able to extract those. If you don't spend that time, you won't be able to extract those. If you don't extract it, you will definitely need more questions. So people who do it right go from 1 to 3 in between 15 and 30 arguments. Now, why 30? Because if your starting ability is very low, if you're a really, really poor reader, which by the way, most of you are not, let me just say this, but some of you may be really poor readers, then it will take longer. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question, Rajesh. Is pre-thinking to be done for questions which don't ask about assumptions? Yes, as I said earlier, Sukriti. Pre-thinking needs to be done, or we do pre-thinking at e-GMAT for assumption, strengthen, weaken, evaluate, logically complete, and boldface. Okay. Would you still suggest that everyone to purchase the official guide on top of our courses? Do you need it? Probably not. Should you purchase it to give yourself? We prefer people purchase the OG Advanced rather than the official guide. Just if I were to ask, if you were to buy one book, it'll be the OG Advanced, not the official guide, is what I would say. Here are some testimonials over here, which says, hey, here's this one of the students who scored a 740, says, understand the passage completely. Take your time. Equally important, pre-think an answer before looking at the answer choice. This one word will have the most impact. As a student scored 770, he failed in critical reasoning in his first attempt. And this is what he discovered. He says, when it gets to, you may be able to do 600 level questions without pre-thinking, but when it comes to 700 level questions, is you've got to do pre-thinking. Otherwise, you won't be able to understand the logic, and you will get trapped. Okay, this guy is now currently studying at Booth. With that, again, another guy who improved from 520 to 740 says, pre-thinking primes the mind, and we are constantly on our toes. Let's go back. While reading a paragraph, that's an RC paragraph or CR question stem. Okay. And it helps you do what we call as predictive reading, which is in the context of RC, that in which direction will the passage orient, etc. It just makes reading a lot easier. Okay. Neha says it's really difficult to do. Neha, if you try it, it's not, but it does require persistence on your part. I mean, remember this, you know, what if 730? If I would really just say, what if 730? What percentile is 730? About 97 percentile. What does that 97 percentile mean? Can you translate that into simple English? What does 97th percentile mean? In simple English. Yes, only 3% of the people worldwide are doing better than you. That's it. Okay. Or in other words, 3%, given the fact that about 200,000 people take the GMAT, about 6,000 people are doing as well as or better than you. Now, people who are not doing as well as or better, it's not that you've spent more time or solved more questions, it's that you have improved your ability more. And that's why 97 percentile is hard. It's not about the time, it's about how much focus and essentially we really say, when you're preparing for the GMAT, a typical student makes about 40 decisions during his or her GMAT prep. Are you making those right decisions about where to focus, how much to focus, how intensely you go there? And that's what makes it hard. The subject matter by itself, this is not rocket science. It's navigating through those decisions. That's where things come in. Anjay says, I love the platform, but okay, I'm going to take this question. The only worry that I have is that from that I have we have the 7 query limit per week. I feel once I start with Scholinium, it will be a hindrance if I can't get my doubts clear. So Anjesh, let me just say this. We get about 700 students a month. At any point in time, we have about 3,000 active students on the platform. Okay. Only 2 out of those 3,000 active students reach the 7 query limit. In fact, 60% of all our students have no queries. 0 queries. Why? Because we have a system where as you post a query against a question, only our expert can respond to it. So 99% of your queries are answered already. By the way, if you need more than 7 queries, then you're doing something that's very wrong. In fact, in the history of our 10 years, we haven't had a single student. We've had students who've asked more doubts, but not a single one of them has succeeded. On the other hand, most people who succeed ask at the most 1 or 2 doubts a month, not a week, a month. So again, go read the reviews. Ask some of our successful students how many doubts they asked. They'll tell you the answer. It doesn't mean they don't have doubts. It's just that those doubts are answered even before they ask that question. Because our experts have been answering doubts against a question for years. That question that you're going to see has been attempted by about 10,000, 12,000 students. It's very difficult to get a new doubt there. All right. With that, are you guys ready to solve the next question? Okay. Now, this is a question that in which if you don't do pre-thinking, you're going to find that the answer choices mess you up. It's a very simple argument, but the answer choices will mess you up. Okay. So please do pre-thinking. If you do pre-thinking, you're going to find that it's very easy to get to the correct answer. So here's the poll for your answer choices. And I'm going to give you 3 minutes to solve this question. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, last 15 seconds. Get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. This is how you guys did. Okay, choices B and E were rarely popular. Choices C and D were okay. ABC were A, B, and D. A, C, and D, I'm sorry, were equally popular. Not super popular, but they were. It's interesting that all of them were. I mean, but 7 of you chose those. But really good participation. I thank you for that. It just makes things very interesting. I want you to tell me, how did the argument feel? And you can say A dash easy, A dash medium, A dash hard. And how did the answer choices feel? And for answer choices, you can really say AS dot this. This is a 700 level question. This is a 700 level question. So how did the argument feel? And how did the answer choices feel? Argument was easy, answer was medium, options made it tricky, okay, confusing. Okay, argument was easy, yes. And this is what we're going to really see is the value of pre-thinking. This is an argument in which it's an assumption question, but the reason why what makes it tricky is there are 4 options here which are strengtheners, and only one of them is the correct assumption. Okay, so we're going to really see how pre-thinking cuts through all the crap and forces you to focus on the relevant metric over here. Okay. Before that, I'm going to take 2 questions. One was a question which says, there's a question, I think I forgot who had asked that question. Let's just go into all questions here. Yeah, it was Siddharth who had asked. He says, hey, while negating, there are multiple ways to negate an answer option. Which way should I go? So Siddharth, negation is about what we call as an alternate sample space. And we'll share an article with you. It's probably the most comprehensive work on negation that's there. Towards the end, I'm going to share that. And so regardless of how you negate a statement, you're going to reach with that space. So yes, in about 10%, not a whole lot, by the way, majority of statements when it comes to negating them are very, very simple. But 10%, there are 2 ways to negate a statement. Both of them are correct and they lead to the same sample space. As long as you can visualize the negated statement, you'd be fine. It doesn't matter which one you choose. Okay. There was another question which said, hey, should you read the argument first or should you read the question first? When learning, I recommend that you should read the argument first. You don't want the information in the question to weigh you down. And once you are at that 70th percentile, you can switch that method. But one way or the other, it's going to make a 5-second impact on the timing. It's not going to make an impact on your accuracy. So that's not a significant question in my opinion. So let's go about solving this. So very interesting piece over here. When you read this argument, it doesn't seem like there's a conclusion there. So you read the question stem and you say, hey, the conclusion's there. The question says, which of the following is an assumption on which the highway commissioner's claim depends? Okay. So what's the claim? The claim is very clear that the toll will increase the annual revenue by at least 50% per year. Okay. We'll look at the right answer. We'll get to the right answer. Okay. So let's clear all answers here. So it's really important to visualize that conclusion. So what we're really saying is if last year the revenue generated was $1 million, then this year that would go to 1.5 million. At least 50%. It would go to 1.6. It would go to 1.7. It doesn't matter, but it should go by at least 50%. Is that visualization clear? Yeah, okay. Very, very simple in this case. Now, how do we estimate annual revenue? What's the formula to estimate annual revenue given the information in the argument? Remember, we're doing pre-thinking here. So how do I estimate annual revenue? Given the information in the argument. How do I estimate annual revenue? It's not the increase in miles. That's not sales miles as expenses. That's profit, by the way. That's not revenue. Number of miles multiplied by cost per mile. Yes, toll times distance. That's it. That's it. Your annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by total number of toll miles. Everyone read the argument. Is that clear? It's fairly simple. Right? Now, what is given to us? Okay, remember, our falsification question remains the same. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will the conclusion break down? Who said number of cars? Let's go back to the argument. Where do you see number of cars in the argument? Do you see a number of cars in the argument anywhere? No. Again, remember, there's a reason you do pre-thinking before you look at answer choices. You don't want the answer choices to corrupt your brain. Pre-thinking has to be done based on information in the argument and argument alone. Once you start looking at the answer choices, throw your pre-thinking out of the window. You can't do pre-thinking then. Okay. So, your pre-thinking question: under what circumstances, given the fact in the argument, will the conclusion break down? And again, so what's my annual revenue? Toll per mile multiplied by total number of toll miles. Okay. So what's my conclusion breakdown criteria? Under what circumstances will my annual revenue not go up by 50%? Given that I know this entity will go up by 50%. So what's the only criteria in which this will not go up by 50%? If this goes down, yes. If the total number of toll miles go down, that's it. Okay. That's the only possible scenario. So my assumption is that the total number of toll miles, that number should not decrease. Is this clear? Is the pre-thinking clear to everyone? Aman has a great question, and thank you, Aman, for phrasing your question so well. It says, in terms of practice and approach, would you recommend writing down the argument in the booklet, breaking it into blocks, and then writing down the assumption and falsifying? Or would you recommend doing this while practicing and building it up to that stage that you won't have to do it in the exam? Aman, you answered your question. It's the latter. Do it if you need it. Absolutely do it. Okay. And what's going to happen, and that's where we humans are so good, you would get to a point that your brain will tell you you don't need to do it. Or you might end up just the intent to doing this or the need to do it reduces significantly. But initially you may have to do it, which is why you will take longer initially, yes, as well. But absolutely do it if you need to. Okay. So let's kind of look at this. The total numbers, that's my only assumption over here. The total number of miles driven does not decrease. Now let's look at choice B, which is the most popular incorrect answer choice. Choice B says that the total number of trips made on the toll highway will not decrease from its current level. Now, does that mean that the total number of miles go down? No, not necessarily. Let's say last year we made 1,000 trips on the toll highway. This year we make 900 trips, and forgive my handwriting. This year we make 900 trips. Does it mean that the total distance goes down? Am I 100% certain that the total distance will go down? No. Why? Because the length of each trip could go up, right? So is this a must be true? Is this a must be true? No, it's not a must be true. And that's the must be true understanding that you have to understand, that you have to get to. Okay. Which is why choice B is incorrect. Choice C, which is my correct answer, talks about the total distance. If the total distance goes down, then the number of miles go down. That's what it translates to, right? So is this a must be true? Absolutely, it is a must be true. Okay. Now, can you really see, if you focus on pre-thinking, how simple this 700 level question becomes? Right? It's just that simple. Prashant says, so it's not talking about one specific toll, but across a region. Yes, which is why annual revenue generated by the toll highway, Prashant. You can see this, and that's why you need to focus on the conclusion. Okay. This is not a single toll, but the toll highway. And that's a great question, by the way. Okay. And choices C and D are also strengtheners. I'm surprised not many more, not many of you chose choice C. If the average length of the trip decreases, what's going to happen? What can compensate for average length of the trip decreasing? Choice C. What can compensate for this? Number of trips. Yes, you can see how choices B and C are complementary. Okay. If the number of drivers who constantly avoid the toll highway, if that number increases, what can compensate? It's the number of trips by the rest of the drivers or the length of the trip by the rest of the drivers. Either one. Okay. So again, focus on what is must be true. If you understand that, you'd be able to get to the answers right away. Okay. Now, we did some difficult questions today, but now we're going to move towards really difficult questions. Are you guys ready for those? These are questions that are there. Okay, was this more of a quant question than CR? Absolutely not. You haven't seen quant questions today. We have a module on quant questions. And by the way, if you go to our YouTube channel, I'm going to post a couple of quant questions in the coming week or so. Kaushik has a great question. He says, for questions where the assumption is asked, wouldn't negating the answer choices be a better approach compared to pre-thinking? So, what's the objective of pre-thinking? What did I really say? What's the objective of pre? It's a great question, Kaushik, and it's a question that many students ask, by the way. But I want to answer this question. What's the objective of pre-thinking? For those of you who've been there with me since the beginning, what did I say? What's the purpose of pre-thinking? It is to understand the logic that the author uses. It doesn't cloud your judgment because you focus on understanding the author, that the logic or the logic that the author uses to arrive at the argument. And if you want to prime your mind, you remember what the quote that the student said. Okay. Now, if you don't do pre-thinking, you will not have a solid understanding of the logic. So you might negate the answer choices, Kaushik, but your judgment post that negation is not going to be that solid. And you can try it. If you don't do pre-thinking, you're going to find that, hey, and when it comes to difficult questions, in easy questions, yes, you may still be able to do. But when it comes to difficult questions, you might negate them. The negation process might be correct. You won't get to the correct answer. Okay. So that's something which is really important. So the other piece is, if you try and negate everything, you're going to take a lot longer on the GMAT. I mean, because you'll have to go through the process of negating 5 options. Remember, each one of these options will provide a different set of information, and just the amount of mental stress that would give you. You're going to find by the time you reach the 20th question on the test, you'll have that mental fatigue. Okay. So with that, let's go to question number 4. Question number 4 is a very difficult question. Don't kill yourself if you don't understand head or tail of it. But by the way, if you follow pre-thinking, you'd be able to get to it. Now, here's what I want to do. Since I don't want to time you guys, what I want to really do is, I want you guys to choose this thing called not answered. So choose this option called not answered. And the logic, my logic is, when but 70 to 80% of you choose an option other than not answered, then I'm going to call time. So that way you as a group will decide how much time you should get. I won't be the judge of it. And the reason why I want to do this is because these are difficult questions. So I don't want to rush you guys through. And I've seen that at different times people take a different amount of time. So when it comes to when it's around the August time frame or so, when most people are super prepped, people take less time. When it comes to January, when most of you are starting your preparation, people actually tend to take longer. Okay. So what I will also have is this timer which says, what percentage of the class is done, so that you guys know. All right. So with that, thank you very much. I'm going to remove broadcast results. And here is your first question. We're going to do these questions one after the other. I'm going to mute myself. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, get those answers in. Close to 75% of you are done. I'm going to give you another 15 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. This is how you guys did. Again, phenomenal participation. Thank you very much, guys. And this was a difficult question. The next question, not as challenging. But it's still a 700 level question. This is what I call a 750 level question. Let me put in the next poll over here. We're going to solve this question, these two questions, one after the other. Again, not answered. Let's get to not answered. I need another 50 people to say not answered before I show the question. 39, 40, 47, 48, 49, 50. Good. Let me broadcast results. Remove broadcast results. Here is the next question. Good luck, guys. All right, guys, close to 80% of you are done. Let's get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. Again, you can see choice D is most popular, but just about 40% of you gravitated towards it. Choice C was most popular, I think, in both questions. Choices C and E are really popular as well, as is choice A. Okay, that's good. Let me just hide this. And I'm going to move this as well. How did these questions feel? These were, as I said, two of the most challenging questions, official questions that I've seen. Um, there are a few more that are in the same category, but nothing that's super difficult. more difficult. These are difficult questions. And argument medium, answer medium. Okay, good. I like how you're reusing the format. Both of these are official questions, yes. So the first one's also an official question. This one's also an official question, yes. And the beauty of this is, these questions do two things. One is they they tell you the importance of pre-thinking and how it helps you cut through the clutter. They also tell you how much you can learn from each question. So a lot of people who answer this particular question correct, they don't comprehend the argument and get to it, which kind of is something because they've seen this question before. And what it means is if you see a similar argument, and if the answer choices were different, worded slightly differently, they wouldn't have gotten to it. Also, when you look at the solutions to these questions on GMAT Club, there aren't the best solutions that you would see. And you can post this session, you can go and do that comparison. So with that, let's kind of look at this over here and what's going on in this case. Let's kind of visualize the conclusion. Okay, the conclusion and first argument, we're going to start with the first argument, which is arguably the more difficult of these two, although both of them are, I'd say, very, very difficult. First argument says the number of worldlanders receiving special program information did not increase significantly, and it talks about this time period over here. Again, clearly you can see it's a very old question, it talks about 94 to 96. And so essentially, if you were to visualize this, and what you're really saying is, one thing is this talks just about worldlanders. The second thing is it talks about special program information only. And so essentially what it's saying is if in 94, if there were 1,000, or let's call it, 10,000 worldlanders, so there were 10K worldlanders that received that special program information in 96, this number was more or less around 10K only. Okay, just really, really important. And again, an understanding of this is it only talks about V's. It doesn't talk about people who are not V's. It doesn't talk about information other than special program information. Okay. When you read this conclusion, did you extract so much out of it? Did you visualize this? Okay, good. That's very, very good. If you did this, as I go into answer choices analysis, I will ask you a couple of questions based on that. Okay, so I'm going to just go through an accelerated process in just this aspect of it. So what's going on over here? This is the main conclusion. What the author is saying is that that here the number of worldlanders that receive this one thing called the special program information, not regular programs, just the special program information, did not increase. Excuse me, did not increase significantly. Let's see, why does the author say that? Okay, the reason why, and what is the special program information? Okay, so there are two things that are there in the context of this. One is the number of, so we have the system where people have let's kind of clear this because we still have some of those other pieces over here. Okay. So we have the system where we have broadcasting radio station and then we have receiving radios in people's houses. And there's this one very special kind of broadcast radio station system, which has RDS technologies. If in the current world, if you were to really say, the equivalent of this would be 5G and cell phone technology, right? And you guys have probably been hearing about 5G or 4G or so. Okay, and what this is saying is that these transmitting stations, they broadcast this thing called special program information, which only radios with this RDS feature can receive. So essentially what you're really saying is if you want to receive special program information or SPI, or let's call it special information, then you need, the broadcasting tower and you need the receiving radio. Both of them need to be there. So if you were to get 5G capability, your transmitting station should be 5G and you should have a 5G cell phone. Essentially, this is what it's saying. Then the next statement says what happened between 94 and 96. The number of broadcasting towers, so RDS radio stations, they increased from 250 to 600. They increased tremendously. They more than doubled. But the number of receiving radios curiously remained the same. Okay, and based on this, the author makes his claim that the number of landers who were receiving the special information, that didn't change a whole lot. Okay. Again, if you were to draw the logical structure, here's your conclusion. Number of landers did not increase a whole lot. Why? Because even the number of radios remain unchanged, the number of stations went up a whole lot. And then to receive RDS programming, you need RDS radios and RDS stations. Is the logical structure absolutely clear? Okay. So we're going to go through this entire same process, and you're going to give me pre-thinking, the possible scenarios. So we're going to ask ourselves, under what scenarios will there be more people, a significant increase in the number of Verlanders? And again, this should be Verlanders, not just people. There should be Vs, because the conclusion is about Vs receiving RDS programming if we have very few additional radios, and if we have a lot more stations. Okay. So what are the scenarios? Can you tell me in what scenario can I break this conclusion down? Can I destroy the author's conclusion? Okay. I want to see more answers here. When the reach increase, yes. Okay. People are not buying RDS radios. The number of radios have remained the same. Okay. There are two answers that I got over here. One is when the reach increase, which means that, hey, you're putting these new transmitting stations. So in 94, you had people who were living in areas where there was no station, but because you've now put in these new stations, they now are under coverage. So that's one thing. The other is if people listen to more and more people start listening to radio, as one of you have said, which means if you start putting these radios in Starbucks, rather, if you we start taking them from houses and start putting them in Starbucks or so, or if more people per family start listening to these radios. So these are two possible scenarios in which my conclusion will break down. Can you guys see this? Either one of this is true, the author's conclusion is destroyed. This is the author's conclusion, by the way. Okay. If these are the scenarios in which my conclusion breaks down, then what are my assumptions? The new stations should not increase coverage significantly where people have the right kind of radios, or people per radio should remain about the same. These are my two assumptions that are there. Everyone's clear with this? Now let's go to the answer choices. This is how you guys polled, by the way. Let me just share these answer choices with you. This is how you guys polled. You can see choice D was really popular, choice A was popular, choice B was popular as well. So was choice C, by the way. The only choice that was not as popular was choice E, which was about the type of programming. Excuse me. So choice A is our correct answer, and it matches essentially with this scenario or this assumption. This is what choice A does. Let's look at this. Choice A says few, if any, of RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94 broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached by RDS stations. So let's kind of translate this into a simpler one. Few, if any, means almost none. Now, of the RDS stations that began broadcasting after 94, these are the new radio stations. Okay. Broadcast to people, so let's start with this part over here. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached. What does that mean? That's increasing your coverage of RDS programming. Okay. Almost none of new stations increase the coverage. It's an essential information. Why? Because if we break this, if we negate this, what happens is that at least some radio stations increase coverage. If at least some radio stations increase coverage, then I as an author cannot say that, hey, the number of Verlanders receiving special program information remained the same. Why? Because there were people who had these special radios but couldn't receive it now, but in 94, but now they can receive it. So the number of Verlanders will go up. Can you see why this is the correct assumption? Why this is essential for the conclusion to hold true? And I'm going to discuss every answer choice in detail. But also, can you see how much can you learn from one question? I mean, this is a very complex piece. How to translate this into something as simple, then how to do that negation on this. So this is the correct answer choice. Choice A is the correct answer. That's why you see tick over here. Every other answer choice is incorrect. And I'm going to go and look at every other answer choice. Let's look at choice B. Choice B says, in 1996, most Verlanders who lived within the listening area of RDS station. Again, put the question in the Q&A pod, please. Okay, let's kind of go to choice B, and that way Harsha can respond to your question over here. In 1996, most Verlanders who lived within the listening area of an RDS station already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. So what does the word most mean? What does the word most mean? Majority. Let's translate that word. Let's translate that word into, I know most means greater than 50%, but we have to take an example. So let's say that's 70%. Is that fair? Can we just take an example of 70%? Okay. Because whatever I'll do with 70% will also work for 90%, will also work for 51%. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you this, the first statement. Okay. What is an assumption? What is an assumption? What is the definition of an assumption? It is it's not an unstated fact, it's an unstated idea. A fact is something that is unstated idea, that is what? That is required for the conclusion to hold true. So it has that must be true piece over here. Now, and again, what is my conclusion about? What is the conclusion? The conclusion is saying the number of Verlanders did not increase a whole lot between 94 and 96. Okay, right? The number of Verlanders receiving the special program information did not increase a whole lot between 94 and 96. So my question to you is it for this conclusion to hold true, is it required that most Verlanders who live within a listening area have an RDS equipped radio? Or in other words, what if in the year 94, only 20% of Verlanders had an RDS equipped radio, and in the year 96, the same 20% had an RDS equipped radio? Will my conclusion still not hold true? Is it required that the word, it will still hold true. So this word most is not required, right? So is choice B a must be true? Or in other words, if I changed this to just 20%, will my conclusion break down? No, it won't. It's not a must be true. Okay. Another way to look at this is the conclusion is about the change in number between 94 and 96. It's saying that the number of Verlanders in 96 who are receiving the special program information or special information, they haven't gone up significantly. It's not about the absolute value in number 94 or the absolute value in 96. And that's kind of where building that mindset of learning and visualizing that conclusion is really important, which is why choice B is wrong. Okay. Let's talk about choice C. Okay, I'm going to clear this so that your choice C talks about what happens when you equip a radio with RDS technology. Okay. Now, what's given to us is you need to equip a radio with RDS technology. Otherwise, can that radio broadcast special information if a radio doesn't have RDS technology? Can a radio broadcast special information? No. Or in other words, if you translate the word no to a number, what's the range of special information if the radio does not have RDS technology? If a station does not have RDS technology? If this guy doesn't have RDS technology, what's the range of special information that it can broadcast? It's out of scope, yes. It's 0, yes, as some of you are saying. Okay. So when we talk about equipping a radio that does not decrease the station's listening area, we're talking about other programming, not RDS programming. And my conclusion doesn't care about programming that is not RDS. I would say this is completely out of scope for my conclusion. And again, that's what happens when you visualize the conclusion. You understand what the conclusion is about. I asked you guys, when you read the conclusion, did you take note of it's about special program, it's about the change in number, it's only about Verlanders? And you guys said, yes, that's how that understanding needs to translate while evaluating answer choices. Let's look at choice D, very popular answer choice. Choice D says, in 1996, people who did not own radios equipped to receive RDS. Do we care about people who don't have the right kind of radio? As per the argument, could not receive any programming. Do we care about any programming? No. It talks about two things that are completely irrelevant to this argument. Yet, most of you, I mean, it's not most, many of you chose this answer choice. In fact, it was the most popular answer choice. So I want to ask you, what forced you to choose this answer choice? I mean, where did you make a mistake? 28 of you chose this answer choice. What made you choose this answer choice? Because the conclusion it doesn't care about any of these terms. Or what learning have you taken as you look at this? Because choice practically no one chose. Transformation of all programs to RDS tech. Why? When the argument tells you need an RDS transmitting radio, that there's a constraint that's given in the argument, you can't break those constraints. Remember, GMAT critical reasoning is a test of logic, not your prior knowledge. If the argument gives you a constraint, you can't go beyond that constraint. Okay. Very similar to if your boss says, hey, you have $10 million to invest. I want you to figure out how to get 20% of market share. If you go and present a plan that requires $20 million, he's going to say, but that's crap. Okay. You have to live within the constraints, because that's what managers do. They work with facts, they interpret those facts, and then really bring about their conclusions and their proposals. All right. So this is a difficult question. I said very difficult question. Don't kill yourself if you get it wrong. But definitely, what did you learn from this question? Okay, that's good. Answer choice options are very tediously worded. Yes. What does that mean? What skill do you need to build? It means you need to understand how to read and translate and comprehend. Yes, absolutely. Understand what information does the answer provide. It's like, what value does this pillar provide? Is this an essential pillar? What information does the answer choice provide? Really important over here. Importance of pre-thinking, really important. Why? Because it focuses you on what the conclusion is about and what how the logic fits into the conclusion. Really important over here. Okay, with that, let's go to the next question. In this case, Shelby will refuse. Let me show the poll, how you guys did. And again, we're going to take visualization to the next level here. Okay, this is how you guys did. 40% of you chose choice D for Delta, but choices C and choice E were also very popular, and for good reason here. Okay, so what's going on here? Let's look at this. Okay, last year, and this one's about reducing the amount of residual ash when you burn something. Last year, we did not recycle anything, right? Nothing was recycled. We burned everything. Everything was incinerated. So, let's kind of assume that one trash can is one truck. And just for translation's sake, or visualization's sake, let's say, we burn these many trucks. So last year, how many trucks did we burn? Can you count the number of trash cans over here? 10. We burned 10 trucks. That incineration, that burning generated a lot of residual ash. This year, we're going to do something. We're going to recycle stuff. And how many trucks are we going to send for incineration this year? Half. Yes, we're going to send 5. Now, here's a question for you. And I'm going to put in a poll question here, I want to make sure that you understand the argument. If instead of collecting the same amount of refuse this year, if I collect 10 times as much refuse, so if I get 10x as much garbage, if I collect that, then when as per the information in the argument, how many trucks do you think we'll send for incineration this year? Okay, if we sent last year, we sent 10 trucks. This year, we collect 10 times as much garbage as we did last year. How many trucks do you think we'll send for incineration this year? 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Come on, we have 100 students. The question is, and I have only what, 50 answers? How many trucks, if I collect 10 times as much garbage, how many trucks do you think will send for incineration this year? Is it 100? It is 50? Is it 25? Is it 10? Is it 5? 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll and broadcast the results. The correct answer is 5, not 50, but 5. And let's kind of see why. And this is where language is beautiful. And this is where comprehension is paramount. And this is where pre-thinking helps you. Let's look at this over here. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce, to is a purpose word, the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number. So what is this saying? This is saying regardless of the amount of garbage you separate, I'm only going to send half as many trucks as we sent last year for incineration. So if I sent 10 trucks last year, even if I collect 10 times as much refuse, how many trucks am I going to send? How many trucks am I going to send? 5, right? Half of what it was last year. If your boss says, regardless of the state of the economy, I'm going to give you 10 engineers to work on this project, then you take that 10. That's a fact that your boss is giving you, and you build your plans around it. Okay, and that's where reading and visualizing is really important. Don't speed read, read and visualize, because this is the information that's going to save your life. Okay. Okay. So what's my conclusion? The ash generated will be half of what was generated last year. Why do we say that? Last year, everything was burned, and burning generated a lot of ash. This year, we'll be sending half as many trucks as we sent for incineration last year. Let's kind of build a falsification question. Okay. In what conditions will the ash generated be more than half of what it was last year, given that we will only send half as many trucks? What's the only scenario in which we will get more ash? If the residual ash per truck increases, if you pack those trucks so tightly that each truck has a lot more garbage in there, and which generates a lot more ash. Again, very, very similar to the highway miles question that we did. The logic is very similar. Okay. Would you call this a quant question? No, this is a pure logic question. Okay. That's the only possible scenario. And which choice talks about this scenario? It's the only choice that talks about this scenario is choice D, D for delta. Okay. So let's talk about the various answer choices. Choice A says this year, no material that city services could separate for recycling will be incinerated. Essentially, this is a must be true condition, but the reason why it's not the correct answer is because this is inferable from the argument. The author already provides it. If you already have a pillar supporting the roof, putting another pillar over there is not going to help you. An assumption is unstated idea that is required for the conclusion to hold true. If the idea is already inferred, it's stated, it's not an unstated idea, which is why it is there. This is not a correct answer. This is one of the 15% of questions where the options have and provide information that's already given in the argument. This is must be true, but not unstated, hence not the correct answer. Cost, we don't care about cost over here, so I think that's there. Let's talk about choice C. Proportion of recyclable material. Does that matter? A lot of you chose choice C. Now that you have an understanding, does the proportion of recyclable material matter? No, it doesn't matter. Why? We're only going to get half as many truckloads. I don't care what it was last year, what it's this year. I care about how much ash does that truckload that I'm burning generate. Okay. Choice D, our correct answer, talks about the ash per truckload. Okay, it compares the ash per truckload to what it was last year, and which is really important. Okay. If you negate this, you can see how my conclusion breaks down. The negated statement is refuse incinerated this year per truckload will generate more ash. And if that's the case, then I can't really say with 100% confidence that I will, the total amount of the ash generated will be half of what it was last year. My conclusion breaks down. This is my must be true. Choice E, actually choice E over here talks about total quantity of refuse. We don't care. Why? Because we are only going to send half as many truckloads. Can you see how pre-thinking makes life so simple? By forcing you to thinking about the logic on the argument. I mean, how choices C and E, which must have been confusing, even those who chose choice D, they just become irrelevant to the entire context. And that's the value of following a process. Okay, so this was the last question for the day. What have you learned so far, and what are you going to do moving forward? What are your key learnings, and how are you going to apply them? Okay, pre-think. What else? You're going to visualize the argument. Even before you pre-think, visualizing and comprehension, really important. Pre-thinking is a tool. But if you don't have that foundation of visualization, if you don't have that habit of comprehending, it's not going to be super helpful. Okay. Once you have that skill of visualization, once you understand this, that's when pre-thinking starts to really play its part. Okay. And so build that. And so when we talked about that chart of timing, step 1 to step 3, you're building that ability to visualize, building that ability to comprehend. If you don't build that, you will never reach step number 3. It's not the pre-thinking that's failing you, it's the visualization and comprehension. Okay. All right, so how will you get there? So one thing is, this is not rocket science. I mean, you saw I went through every question in the same manner. The place where, the meat of the entire system was in understanding the argument and breaking down sentences into segments and visualizing those. Okay. And then once you do that, all you have to do is ask the falsification question, and assumptions jump right at you. Okay. So how do you get to that 90th percentile? Really important. Make sure you understand which statement is the conclusion, what's that logical structure. Really important as you read that over there. Okay. Then visualize that conclusion. This is what this slide says is what's stopping you from scoring that 90th percentile, and what I'm talking about is what you should do so that this doesn't stop you. Okay, make sure you can draw that structure of argument. Really important. Even before you ask yourself, you say, okay, do I understand which statement is my main conclusion, which one's supporting that conclusion, which one's the context, which one may be going against the conclusion. That's something which is really important. And then ask yourself, can I fully visualize the conclusion? Can I translate into numbers and put something over here? Or can I really just see that scenario happening in front of my eyes? Then link the argument. And as you link the argument, ask yourself, do I understand what all the premises are saying and how they are increasing the belief in the conclusion? Okay. What is the context? What is rule or what constraints does this context put in terms of my ability to really understand the logic that the author uses? And then once you do the pre-thinking, you have a really good idea of what the correct answer should say. You should then look at the answer choices and then make sure you are able to do the same thing to the answer choice that you did to the conclusion, where you are able to visualize that answer choice and then really say, does it make sense in the context of the logic of the argument or in the context of my pre-thinking? Okay. Because if you fail to understand the answer choice, as you saw in the last 2 questions, you will make mistakes. Okay. And you've got to do all of this on a single CR question, and you will do this in less than 2 minutes once you build those skills. Without those skills, you might end up spending 10 minutes. You will still not get to the correct answer. But with those skills, 2 minutes and you'll get to the correct answer very frequently. This is why very few people get to that 90th percentile, because they don't focus on building this one after the other. They try and build all 4 of them together. And when you try and build all 4 of them together, you don't achieve mastery. You don't achieve mastery, you'll still have answer choices that will trick you. You'll still end up, as questions become more difficult, choose the incorrect answer choice. Okay. So how do you do this one step at a time? And your goal, if you're an e-GMAT student, is to achieve That's 65% accuracy in hard question. This is a 3D chart from Scholarium. People who achieve a 787, 770, 780 hit this metric. Now for medium, this number is 85 to 90%. For easy, of course, this is 85 to 90%. So bottom line is, even with this in hard questions, there will be 35% or 30% of questions. You will still make mistakes, but if you get there, you will know you are at that 95th percentile ability. So how do you build those fundamentals? There are two portions where you build those fundamentals. One is in the premise and conclusion files. The second is in the inference module. If you're an e-GMAT student, how many of you have gone through the inference module? If you are an e-GMAT student, how many of you have gone through the inference module? Yes, no. Yes, no. Not yet. When you go through the inference module, one thing that it will tell you is how do you visualize statements, and you will see single sentences, and you will see that the kind of questions we pose against those sentences, they will rack your brains, and that's when your brain's going to get stressed, when you will be forced to think about those visualizations, that's when you're building that ability. Don't skip the inference module. There's a reason why it's before assumption. It's actually our largest module. Some of you will probably take 4 days just to go through the inference module, and you might question, why is it that if I'm only going to get 1 to 2 questions, probably one, not even 2 questions in inference, why am I doing this? It's because it's the foundation for assumption, strengthen, weaken, and evaluate. It teaches you how to evaluate statements, how to combine two statements and draw more information from them. Don't skip through that. Okay. Similarly, premise and conclusion over here. Then go through the assumption module. This is what's there in the free trial. Again, you'll really see it's about 2.5 to 3 hours. But once you know how to read and comprehend statements, you have a foundation of what an assumption is. Then we teach you how to visualize and pre-think in different kinds of arguments: logical gap, two entities, segments over here. And as you go from one concept file to the other, and these are all evaluated. This is not your completion score. This is the score that you did in the post-assessment quizzes. This is not the length of video. This is how much time this particular student spent. Each one of you will spend a different amount of time over here. You will learn how to visualize this. And some of these people actually come back to this multiple times because there's just so much to extract from this. If you're a paid student, this is what you will go through just in the assumption context over here. Again, it is effort, but it's effort that's really well spent because this is what builds the foundation. Once you do inference and assumption, you are done with about 60% of all the learning that needs to happen in critical reasoning. Everything else is just 40%. Okay. But you've got to make sure you do this well. You've got to make sure you build that pre-thinking muscle. You build that ability to visualize. You build that habit of comprehending as you read in the inference and assumption module. Once you have that habit, everything else is fairly simple. Okay. All right. With that, this is a guy who's currently studying at TAK, who just got into TAK, and someone who's very logical, but because he wasn't doing pre-thinking, he was stuck at a 540. So someone who taught physics at an undergraduate level, I thought I could get through logic very easily. But then the language trapped him because he was rushing through things, and the very fact that he slowed down and spent those extra 10 seconds doing pre-thinking helped him get to 97 percentile on critical reasoning. Okay. So with that, start your pre-thinking journey. If you're not an e-GMAT student, go through these files. If you're an e-GMAT student, go through right from the very beginning, go through the premise and conclusion files, go through the inference module, and then you go through the assumption module also. Okay. All right, guys. With that, feedback on the session. I'm going to actually go to the end of a module pod. So you can download the PDF over here, top left-hand corner. You can download that. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you can see some of the links below there. That's our LinkedIn if you want a study plan or take the Sigma X mock. Okay. Some of you were asking, what do you need for scholarships and admits? This article, MBA admissions, So because we get the most, we deliver more 700 plus scores, our students have reported upwards of $200 million worth of scholarships. We also have a lot of data. So this is research that you won't find anywhere, which is, if you're an international student, what kind of scores do you need to get into different kind of colleges? What scholarships can you get into or so? And yes, it's a good way to start Saturday morning. It's a good way to start my Saturday morning as well. I'm going out for a run right after this. Okay. All right. Any other question that I can answer? And let me bring in the Q&A part here as well. On a hike, that's great. That's wonderful. Yes. It's pretty cloudy here, so I won't adventure very far from the house, but yeah, but I'm going to go for a run. All right. How long does it take for you to go from 550 to 720 or so? So we're looking at about 200 hours of effort to go from 550 to 720 or so. Okay. That's good. It seems most of the questions are answered. What are the charges for paid e-GMAT version? I look at on the website. We have 3 plans. You can buy a 2-month course if you're looking for a verbal only or a quant only option. 4-month course if you're looking for about 200 points of improvement. If you're looking for about 300 to 400 points of improvement, then we have a 6-month version as well. So Arushi says I generally do well in practice, but this doesn't translate into real exam. Any theories? Arushi, you're practicing easier questions. As questions become more difficult, you falter. I mean, we have students who score 80% accuracy, 90% accuracy on medium questions, and when it comes to hard questions, their accuracy drops to 35%. Again, and I mean, take a Sigma X mock. You'll really see it's not a test taking skill problem. It's really, when it comes to hard questions, 9 out of 10 cases, you don't have the ability. Okay. A lot of people think timing makes a huge difference on the test. It doesn't. Unless and until you completely start to panic. Most people don't. Most people with high abilities do not panic. So that's what makes you someone with high ability. Most people overestimate the ability that they have and essentially think that they deserve a 700, 710, 720 score, and then they get a rude surprise when they take the test. And the bad thing about all of this is that a lot of the official GMAT prep questions are there on GMAT Club. They score well on the official GMAT exams, not because the exams are bad, but because they've seen those questions before. Does the e-GMAT platform also track how many hours of effort has gone in? We do track, yes. We track everything that's there. You can see that. So every activity that you go through has a time tracked, yes. Okay. But again, remember this. I talked about 200. That's an average number. Your case could be 150. It could be 250. What happens, for example, if you're watching one of the assumption concept file, and in the middle, you actually go and say, hey, let me go and watch a YouTube video. And in that case, what you're going to find is you're going to do well in the you do poorly in the post-assessment quiz, and you'll have to come back and do this again. So that 200 estimate would be would actually then start to look more like, if you do this frequently, 250 to 270 hours. So 200 hours for you assumes that you're diligent. When you put in study sessions of an hour to an hour and a half long, you're not going and watching YouTube videos in between. You're very focused in that case. So and again, I'll ask you this, this happens. That we go and we're studying something and then we say, hey, let me just go take a break for 10 minutes. No. One of the big things you have to do is control that urge to doing that. And that's one of the reasons why we prefer audiovisual and interactive lessons, where you can't just sit down and let the video play. You have to interact with the video. That's why we build all of this purpose-built learning. And we prefer it way more than text. It's just, you can't sit back or you can't slouch. We get to know when you slouch. Do you get a recording for e-GMAT students? Absolutely. Everyone will get a recording. Awesome. Can you opt for a verbal only plan? Yes. I mean, that we used to have a verbal only plan that used to cost $250. But what we found was most people only need the course for 2 months if you're just going for a verbal only plan. And so that's why we started offering, the online GMAT for 2 months. That way, uh, if whatever you get all the mock tests, whatever little refresher you need in quant, you get that. You get the entire sort of scholarly analytics as well. And so if you need the course just for 2 months, you pay less and you get more benefit. So that's the verbal only plan. Kaushik says, what's the optimal break between mocks in terms of weeks or months? So Kaushik, I think there are two answers to that. One is, if you're an e-GMAT student, you take mocks only towards the last 20 days. Why? Because if you're an e-GMAT student, you first go through the course, then you do cementing, and if you do medium cementing, you do hard cementing. If you do well in medium and hard cementing, you already have an ability estimate in CR. So taking a mock at that point becomes counterintuitive. Then you do the next subsection. Maybe you do, reading comprehension. Follow the same process. After you do this, after you do cementing and reading comprehension, you do test readiness in CR and RC, which again allows you to really say, hey, how gives you a really reliable estimate of how well you would have done on the mock. And you do this, and then once you're done with 80% of all subsections, including verbal and quant, that's when you start taking mocks. That way, A, you don't waste your mock, B, you get very precise feedback, and C, you don't forget stuff. 580 in the first mock, which plan should you opt for, Sukriti? Actually, let me first answer Kaushik's question. So once you get to those last 20, 25 days and you're taking mocks, that's when the optimal time between mocks depends on the kind of improvement that you're looking at between mock scores. And that's where we have our dedicated strategy team that will tell you, if you have this mock score, let's say you have a 660, we want to make sure next mock you get a 700. These are 4 things you need to do. This is what you do in these 4 things. These are the metrics that you should achieve before you take the next mock. And so it could be 4 days, it could be 7 days or 8 days, but it'll always be purpose driven. And that's where when you look at those reviews, you will see those mentors mentioned talking about it. I mean, we have 4 mentors outside of all the SMEs who have each enabled 30 plus 700 plus scores in 2021. And just to really tell you how significant that 30 plus number is, just other than e-GMAT and target test prep, no other company delivered 3,700 plus scores. At e-GMAT, each of those mentors has delivered 3,700 plus scores on GMAT Club. Okay, 580 in the first mock. Which plan? I would say ideally, if you're a working professional, if you're going to put in about 15 to 18 hours per week, then the 4-month plan would work for you, which is the intensive plan. Okay. Again, buy the course, take a Sigma X mock, or actually put in the mock scores if you already have. 580 doesn't really require that you take a Sigma X mock, but open the PSP, build that study plan, and start with either quant or verbal. All right, guys, with that, I want to thank you for joining me today. It was excellent having you guys. Thank you for such active participation. And make sure you go through the free trial files and make sure you join the algebra session tomorrow. Good luck, and as I really say, happy learning. Excuse me.